There's a kind of man the West forgets to name. Not the outlaw, not the sheriff, not the one who rides into town with a reputation already trailing him like dust. I mean the other kind. The one who shows up at your gate in the middle of a January freeze, hat in hand, nothing but a bedroll and a horse that's seen better years, asking if maybe, just maybe, you have room in the barn. My name is Clara Whitfield, and I keep a ledger. Not the kind most ranchers keep, columns of cattle counts and feed costs and what the banker in Tucson still owes my family in apologies. Mine is different. Mine has dates in the margins, small notes, things I don't want to forget and things I wish I could. January 14th, 1887, a man came to the gate. I wrote that the night Eli running waiter knocked on my fence post in a sleet storm, and I cracked the front door open 3 inches to look at him. I didn't write what I actually thought when I saw him standing there. I wrote what I should have thought, Apache, alone, no weapon visible, gate closed. But what I actually thought, what I didn't write until 2 winters later, when the ink and the truth had both had time to settle, was something much simpler and much more frightening. He looked like someone the world had already finished with. And I knew that feeling. God help me, I knew it from the inside. So I opened the gate. What happened after that took 3 years, 4 seasons of drought, 1 barn fire, a bad decision I'll carry the rest of my life, and a conversation I almost didn't survive emotionally to finish. But it started there, at the gate in the sleet. And if you want to understand how a woman who kept a ledger for everything, cattle, debts, regrets, ended up writing a man's name in a margin with no column attached to it at all, then you'll have to come with me from the beginning. The sleet had been coming sideways for 2 hours before I heard the knock. Not a knock exactly, more like the fence post being struck 3 times with something metal, deliberate, not desperate, the kind of knock that says I know you might say no, and I've already made my peace with that. I'd been at my writing table near the window, doing the ledger the way I always did on winter evenings, tallying what the month had cost me against what the month had given back, which lately was not a fair trade. The Whitfield ranch wasn't failing, but it was leaning. The way an old tree leans when the roots on one side have gotten tired. My husband Thomas had been gone 14 months. Not dead, gone. Which is its own specific kind of grief, because you can't mourn a man who simply decided he preferred New Mexico to responsibility. You just carry the ranch and you carry the ledger and you keep the columns straight. I set my pen down. The sleet against the glass was loud enough that I almost talked myself into having imagined the knock, but then it came again. 3 strikes. The same rhythm, patient. I took the lamp from the table and walked to the front door. I didn't open it all the way, just the 3 inches that allowed me to see without being fully seen. An old habit. The ranch was 2 miles from town, and I'd been 2 miles from town alone for 14 months. He was standing at the gate post, not at the door. That was the first thing I noticed. He'd stopped where it was polite to stop, where a person stops when they're not assuming anything. He was Apache. That registered with the same plainness as anything else I might have observed. Tall, quiet, hat low against the sleet, a horse standing just behind him with its head dropped in the patient way horses have when they've given up expecting comfort soon. His coat was not warm enough for January. I could see that even in the dark. The fabric was summer weight, dark with wet, and he was holding himself in that careful way people hold themselves when they're cold enough that moving wrong might cost them something. He didn't call out, didn't wave, just stood there visible, hands open at his sides, waiting. I will not pretend I wasn't afraid. Fear is a reasonable response to a stranger at your gate in a sleet storm in the dark. But I've learned to ask myself in moments like that what specifically I'm afraid of. It's a discipline I developed after Thomas left, the practice of naming the actual fear rather than the general shape of it. What I was afraid of, when I held that lamp and looked through the 3-inch gap, was not the man at the gate. I was afraid of the look on his face, because it was the same look I'd seen in my mirror at about the 6-month mark of Thomas being gone. That particular flatness. Not hopelessness exactly, more like a person who has already asked the world for help enough times that they've stopped expecting the answer to be yes, but they're trying one more time because the body requires it. I pulled on my coat, took the rifle from beside the door, not pointed, just present, carried the way you carry sense with you. Then I went out. The sleet hit me immediately. Cold and mean, the kind that finds the back of your neck no matter what you're wearing. I stopped 6 feet from the gate. He didn't move toward me. "Evening," I said. "Evening, ma'am." His voice was low, not soft in the gentle sense, more like a voice accustomed to not wasting itself. "You lost?" "No, ma'am." "Hurt?" A pause. "My horse's left foreleg. She walked it through, but she needs to be off it." I looked at the horse. In the lamplight I could see the animal was favoring the leg even while standing still, weight shifted, the slight tremor of something endured too long. "What do you need?" I asked. "Barn if you have one. I'll sleep in it. Leave first light." "That's it. That's it." I stood there in the sleet for a moment longer than was probably necessary, studying the man at my gate. He didn't fidget, didn't add anything, didn't explain or justify or fill the silence with reassurance. He'd said what he needed, and now he was waiting for the world to answer. I opened the gate. "Barn's around the east side," I said. "There's hay. Water pump inside works, but you'll need to prime it. I'll bring something warm." He nodded once, just once. Then he took hold of his horse's lead and walked in the direction I'd pointed, not looking back, not thanking me yet, as if he'd learned that gratitude offered too soon sometimes makes the person giving help feel observed, and he didn't want to make me feel anything at all yet. That was the second thing I noticed about him. He was considerate in ways that didn't announce themselves. I brought soup in a tin pot with a lid, cornbread in a cloth. I left them just inside the barn door without going fully in, gave a small knock on the doorframe so he'd know they were there. "Name's Clara Whitfield," I said. "Eli," he said from somewhere in the dark near the horse's stall. "Eli, running waiter." "Where are you headed, Eli?" A pause, the kind that means the answer is complicated. "Nowhere particular," he said. "Away from somewhere." I understood that. I didn't say so. "Pump needs 2 firm pulls before it gives water," I said instead. "Horse will be fine in the far stall. There's salve on the shelf above the second post if the leg needs it." "Thank you, ma'am." I went back to the house. I opened my ledger. I wrote, January 14th, 1887. A man came to the gate. Then I sat there for a long time, not writing anything else. He was still there in the morning. Not because he'd overslept or overstayed. He was up before me, that much was plain. When I went to the barn at first light with the intention of beginning my rounds, I found that the water trough had been refilled. The hay in the other 2 stalls had been redistributed and freshened, the barn floor swept, and a small, careful repair made to the latch on the east-facing door that had been broken since October, and that I'd been meaning to fix for 2 months. Eli was standing outside, looking at his horse's leg in the early gray light. The mare was bearing weight more evenly this morning, but slowly. He crouched down and ran 2 fingers along the tendon in a way that was neither rough nor rushed, just careful, deliberate attention. "She needs another day," he said without turning around. He'd heard me coming. "I can work for the day if you'll have it." I almost said no. Not out of unkindness, out of the habit I'd developed of doing things myself. When you've been alone long enough, other people's help starts to feel like something you have to manage. But the latch, he'd fixed the latch, and I'd been meaning to get to it since October. "I have fence line on the north quarter that needs stretching," I said. 3 posts that need resetting. Ground's frozen, so it'll be hard going." "I can do that." You'll need tools, they're in. I found them, he said, shelf above the workbench, left side. I looked at him for a moment. He still wasn't quite meeting my eyes, not evasively, more like he was accustomed to not pressing himself on people, keeping himself at a respectful angle. Breakfast first, I said. He hesitated for just a second. Just enough that I caught it. You don't have to. I know I don't, I said. I'm saying it anyway. Come to the house when you've put the mare back in. He ate quietly. I noticed he ate slowly, too, not savoring but pacing. The way a person eats when they've gone without enough times that they've learned not to trust abundance to last. I kept my ledger on the table beside my coffee, which is where I always kept it, and I was aware of him glancing at it once. Not nosily. More like he noticed it the way a person notices a personal item, something that tells you something about someone without their meaning to tell you. You're a rancher who keeps a journal, he said. Just an observation, not a question. A ledger, I said. There's a difference. What's the difference? A journal is where you put what you feel. A ledger is where you put what happened. He considered that for a moment. Do they end up being the same thing? I looked at my coffee, more often than they should. He almost smiled. I caught the edge of it, the corner of his mouth moving by about 2 degrees before he brought it back. But it had been there, brief and real and gone. I wrote that in the margin that night, 2 degrees, with no explanation of what I meant by it. He fixed the fence line in the time I'd estimated it would take 2 men. I watched from a distance for a while in the early afternoon, not trying to hide that I was watching. He worked with the same quality he had at the barn, no wasted motion, nothing performed. Just the task done correctly, done completely. The posts went in plumb even in the frozen ground. The wire came tight without singing, a hard thing to manage in cold. When he came back near evening, I was doing the ledger on the porch despite the cold because the light was better out there. Fence is done, he said. I can see that, I said, thank you. Roof of the linta has 2 bad shingles. Left side, near the chimney flue. 1 good rain and you'll have water inside. I know. I can fix it tomorrow if the mare still needs rest. I put my pen down. I looked at him. He was standing at the bottom of the porch steps, not on them, and the evening light was coming in low and flat from the west, and it made him look very tired. Not in the face, somewhere behind the face. Where are you actually from? I asked. San Carlos, he said. That was an Apache reservation in Arizona Territory. I knew the name. When did you leave? March. We were in January. He'd been out in the world for 10 months. I didn't ask what had driven him out. Not then. Some things earn their telling. You don't ask for them. There's a room in the house, I said. It's a cold room, faces north, no fireplace. But it's a room. The mare will need at least 3 days on that leg. Frozen ground's going to make it worse before it makes it better. He was quiet for a long moment. I waited. People will talk, he said. In town. People in town have been talking about me since Thomas left, I said. I've gotten comfortable disappointing them. The 2 degrees again, maybe 3 this time. I can pay for the room, he said. You already have, I said. Fence line and a latch and advance notice on bad shingles. I'll take it. I went inside. After a moment, I heard his boots on the steps. I opened my ledger that night and wrote the date again, under the morning's entry, January 15th, and then I sat with my pen over the page for a long moment before I wrote anything else. What I finally wrote was this. He says almost nothing, but I have the peculiar sense that if he did say something, it would be worth hearing. Then I closed the ledger and went to bed. Outside, the sleet had stopped. The sky was doing what January skies sometimes do, clearing out sudden and cold and brilliant, filling up with stars like something trying to make up for what it had put you through. I didn't look out the window to see it. but I could tell it was there. March came in lying. That's the only way I know how to say it. The first week was warm, wrong warm, the kind that makes the ground soft on top and still dead underneath, and makes you think about planting when you shouldn't. The second week sent a dry wind from the south that pulled the warmth back like someone yanking a blanket off a sleeping person. By the end of the month, the creek that fed the south pasture was down to a trickle, and every rancher in the county was doing the same quiet arithmetic. How much water, how many head, how long? Eli had been at the Whitfield Ranch for 6 weeks. I want to be precise about how that happened because the truth of it matters. He didn't stay because I invited him to stay. He stayed because the work was real, and the work kept presenting itself. And one morning I stopped framing it as how long is this arrangement and started framing it as what needs doing today. There's a difference. It was a deliberate choice, made quietly, and I made it alone, and I didn't write it in the ledger for a full week after. The shingles on the linta got fixed. Then the rotted section of the south fence that I'd been patching with wire instead of replacing properly. Then the pump housing in the south pasture, which had cracked in the previous year's freeze. Then a dozen other things, medium and small, that accumulate on a working ranch when one person is trying to manage what 2 people built. We had, in that time, developed a working rhythm. We ate breakfast together, because I cooked enough for 2 and it made no sense to make 2 separate fires. We worked separately through the day, unless a task required 2 sets of hands, which happened more often than it didn't. In the evenings, sometimes we sat on the porch. Sometimes I wrote in the ledger and he did something I couldn't quite name. He'd take small pieces of wood or bone from his coat pocket and do careful work with a short-bladed knife, shaping things I couldn't always identify. He never explained what they were. I never asked. What I mean to say is that we were careful with each other. Very careful. The way 2 people are careful when they've both learned, separately, that getting things wrong is expensive. The drought announcement, if you could call it that, came in the form of Abel Marsh riding up my lane on a Thursday in late March. Abel was my nearest neighbor, 4 miles east. Good man, practical to the point of being sometimes brutal about it. He pulled up short when he saw Eli coming out of the barn, with a coil of rope over one shoulder. "Clara," Abel said carefully, not taking his eyes off Eli. "Abel," I said, coming off the porch, "this is Eli. He's been helping me get the North Quadrant back in order." Abel looked at me, then at Eli, then back at me. He did this with the expression of a man filing information away for later processing. "Creek's dry at my place," he said. "Halfway dry at the Coombs place. You checking yours?" "Trickle," I said. "As of this morning." Abel took his hat off, turned it in his hands. "If this is what it looks like, it's going to be a hard spring." "It's what it looks like," I said. He nodded slowly. Then, seemingly in spite of himself, he said to Eli, "You know cattle." Eli looked at him, "Some." "You know water finding it, Apache no terrain." "Abel," I said, because the way he'd phrased it scraped at something. "I mean it as a practical question," Abel said, "not otherwise." There was a pause. Eli was considering whether to answer. I could tell, not by anything visible, but I'd been watching this man think for 6 weeks, and I'd learned the slight stillness that preceded when he decided something mattered enough to speak. "I know the land south of here better than you do," Eli said. "If there's water that's not being used, it'll be in the canyon systems. Baja Ridge, maybe 2 miles. Abel looked at me. "I'll be damned," he said, though he didn't look damned, he looked relieved. "Language," I said. The 3 of us rode out 2 days later, Abel, myself, and Eli, who led the way without commentary, navigating the scrub terrain south of the ranch with the particular ease of someone reading a text everyone else has in a language they can't speak. He found water, not a lot, a seep really, running from a shelf of rock into a natural basin that had been half hidden by scrub brush. But in a drought, a seep is a fortune. Abel sat on his horse staring at it for a long time. "There's another one," Eli said. "Farther south, maybe a mile, smaller." "I'm not certain." "Worth checking?" Abel asked. "Worth checking." Abel turned to me. I knew the look. It was the look of a practical man revising something. "I'll get Coombs and his boys out here," Abel said. "We can build a collection system, run pipe to the south pasture." "My line runs closest," I said. "You'll need to come through my land." "I know that." "You can." Abel nodded. He looked at Eli one more time. "Thank you," he said. The words were clearly harder than he expected them to be, and he knew we could both see that, and he looked like a man who decided to say them anyway. Eli just nodded. On the ride back, Eli was quiet for a long time. The sun was dropping, throwing long shadows east, and the horses moved through the scrub at a relaxed walk. I let the silence be. I'd learned not to fill Eli's silences. They weren't empty. They were just his. But then he said, "He'll tell people in town." "About the water." "About me." I looked at him sideways on my horse. "What would you like him to tell them?" He thought about it. "The truth," he said, "or nothing." "That's usually the only two things worth saying," I said. He was quiet again. Then, "How long since your husband left?" It was the first time he'd asked me anything directly personal. The question was gentle, not pressing, more like he was acknowledging that he'd been aware of a weight I'd been carrying and wanted me to know he'd seen it. 14 months when you arrived," I said, "so 16 now." "He's not coming back." "No." "You know that." "I knew it at about month 3, I said. "The rest has been paperwork, internal paperwork." He almost smiled again, more than 2 degrees this time, closer to 4. "Do you miss him?" he asked. I turned that question over. It was a better question than it looked, because the honest answer was complicated. "I miss having someone to split the weight with," I said. "I don't miss him specifically," which tells you most of what you need to know about the marriage. Eli nodded slowly, considering. "You were married," I said. It wasn't a question. I'd seen the evidence of it, the way he sometimes looked at something with a specific kind of distance, like a place where someone else used to stand. "Yes," he said. "I waited." "She died," he said. "Winter before last, fever." "I'm sorry." "She was," he stopped, started again. "She would have liked your ledger. She liked keeping track of things. She said it was the only way to know where you were." I felt something move in my chest, quiet and painful, like a door opening in a room that's been closed too long. "What was her name?" I asked. "Naya," he said. He said it the way you say a name when the word has weight, not heavier than usual but denser, packed with something. We rode the rest of the way in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before. The kind that forms between two people who have just shown each other a room they don't usually open. That night I opened my ledger. I thought about what to write. I stayed with my pen hovering over the page longer than I had in months. What I finally wrote wasn't a record of what had happened. It was a question which I'd never put in the ledger before. I didn't believe in ledgers for questions, but here it was. When two people are each other's first real conversation in a long time, what do you call that? I didn't write an answer. I closed the ledger. Somewhere in the cold north room, I heard the small sounds of Eli at his whittling, the quiet scrape of the blade, the occasional pause, the patient rhythm of a man making something out of what he had. Outside, the south wind was still dry. The drought wasn't done with us. Abel was going to have to work his land against it, and I was going to have to work mine, and Eli was going to. I stopped. I realized I'd been doing my planning in a way that automatically included him. The way you do when someone has become part of your working picture of the future. Not invited consciously, just absorbed, The way a useful word gets absorbed into daily speech until you can't remember when you started using it. I sat with that realization for a while. Then I opened the ledger again, added one line beneath the question. January 14th feels like a long time ago, but I can still see exactly what he looked like standing at that gate. I closed it again, final this time. The whittling sounds continued in the north room. I went to sleep. The barn fire started on a Tuesday in late July, at 20 minutes past 2 in the morning, and I want to be clear that it was my fault. Not the fire itself, a dry summer bad luck, a lantern I'd left on a nail hook I'd been meaning to move, a night wind that came through the gap in the east wall that Eli had mentioned twice and I'd said I'd deal with and hadn't. Not the fire itself, but the sequence of choices that led to the fire. Those were mine. I was awake when it started. That's the part I can never get clean of. I was sitting at my writing table doing the ledger, a July accounting that was looking better than March, thanks to the water from the canyon seep, thanks to the pipe system Abel and Coombs had put together, thanks to the pasture that should have been dry being, against reasonable expectation, only half dry. I was doing the ledger and something in the air made me look up. The orange on the south wall of the barn was the kind of orange that takes a moment to name. I was out the door before I decided to move. I'll tell you what I remember in the order I remember it, and some of it isn't linear because that's how it actually was. I remember the heat, the way it came at you as a pressure first, before the warmth, like the air itself was leaning. I remember that the horses were screaming, a sound I'd heard once before in a different kind of trouble and had been trying not to hear again. I remember running and opening the barn door and the smoke being wrong, not the way smoke rises, but the way it moved sideways and low, filling the middle space. The fire was on the east wall, moving up fast along a beam that had probably been dry since spring. I remember that Eli was already inside. He'd gotten there before me, which meant he'd smelled it or seen it from the north room and come without waking me, without stopping to call for me, moving straight to the problem the way he moved at everything. No ceremony, just the task. He had the first horse out, was going back for the second. Eli, I started. Get the water line, he said, already moving. I did. I got the water line from the pump, but I knew what we both knew. The pump couldn't reach that far, and the line was short, and what it was going to do was slow it, not stop it. Eli brought the second horse out. Then he turned for the barn again. Stop, I said. Feed is stored. Stop, I grabbed his arm. I wasn't gentle about it. He stopped, looked at me. The feed is not worth going back in there, I said. Winter feed is not worth your life. He looked at the barn. The east wall was fully involved now. The heat was a wall itself, and I watched his face do something complicated, the calculation of a man who doesn't see his own life as clearly as he sees the problem in front of him, which is a specific and recognizable blindness, and I had no patience for it. Eli, I said, I am telling you, don't go back in. He turned and looked at me. And for the first time since January, in 6.5 months of careful peripheral eye contact, 2-degree half-smiles, long silences that said more than language, he looked at me directly, fully. The way a person looks at someone when they're deciding whether what that person is saying constitutes a reason that actually reaches them. There's enough feed, I said. I stretched the order in May. I have enough to make November, I was going to tell you. Something shifted in his face. You planned ahead, he said. I always plan ahead. He stood there with the heat pressing against us both and the orange light making everything jump. The horses were pulled to the far fence, shaking. The beam on the east wall cracked loudly, and part of the roof began to cave. He stepped back. We stood there, and we watched the barn burn down. It took the rest of the night. Abel came at first light. Someone had seen the glow from the road. He brought Coombs. They brought water and tools and help that came too late for the barn, but was still help. Eli worked with them, clearing debris, checking for spread to the lean-to. Quiet, methodical. While the men worked, I stood at a distance and wrote in my ledger. It was a thing I did when I didn't know what else to do with myself, reach for the accounting. It had always helped me place things. I wrote down what the barn would cost to rebuild. I did the math. It was substantial, not ruinous but substantial. I sat with that number. Then I wrote something else. He was going back in, and I grabbed his arm, and he stopped. I looked at that sentence for a long time. Later in the morning, when Abel and Coombs had gone home for their own chores, Eli came and sat on the porch steps while I was still on the porch. He didn't sit in the chair, just on the steps, back against the railing, the way he sat when he wasn't sure if he was staying. "I'm sorry about the barn," he said. "It wasn't your fault," I said. "I should have moved that lantern hook. I should have moved that lantern hook. You mentioned it, I didn't do it." He was quiet. "The east wall gap," I said. "You mentioned that too." "Clara." "I'm not laying it on myself to be dramatic," I said. "I'm laying it on myself because it's accurate. I know the difference." He looked out toward the ruin of the barn. In the morning light, it was less terrible looking than it had been in the dark, which is the thing about disasters. They get more manageable once you can see the edges of them. "Where will the horses go?" he asked. "I'll build a temporary shelter off the lean-to, big enough for the winter. We can put up a proper barn in the spring." I paused. "If we have help." The word "we" was in the air between us now. I'd said it deliberately, not carelessly. He turned to look at me. That same direct look from last night, the one I'd gotten once in 6 months. "What does that mean?" he said. "It means what it sounds like," I said. "I'm not very complicated, Eli. I keep a ledger because I don't trust myself to remember things accurately when emotions are involved. But I can tell you what's in the ledger. You've been here since January. You've done the work of a partner and taken the wage of a charity case, and that has been my fault, not yours, because I didn't know how to say." I stopped. I looked at my ledger in my hands. "There's a question in here," I said. "From March. I don't usually put questions in the ledger, but I put this one." "What is it?" I opened to the page. I'd had it marked for a while, though I hadn't admitted that to myself until this moment. I read it aloud. "When two people are each other's first real conversation in a long time, what do you call that?" The quiet that followed was the particular quiet of something being decided. "I don't know what to call it," Eli said. "I've been trying to figure that out too." "You have?" "Since about February," he said, and his voice had something in it I hadn't heard before, something small and careful and very honest. I closed the ledger. I set it down on the chair beside me. This was deliberate. I was putting the accounting away. "Naya would have been 31 this spring," I said. "It was a risk. I knew it was a risk. But I decided that the only way through the careful distance between us was to walk straight at the things we'd been circling." He didn't flinch. He nodded slowly. "Thomas was a coward," I said, "and I mean that technically. He was afraid of hard work and he was afraid of staying, and so he left. That's not grief I'm carrying for him. That's just accuracy." "You're not afraid of hard work," Eli said. "No," I said, "and I'm done being afraid of staying." He looked at me. The morning light was full now, bright and dry and relentless the way July in this country was always relentless. It lit the smoke still rising from the ruin behind him, and it lit his face, and I saw in it something that had been there for months, probably. Something I'd caught the edges of and chosen not to name because naming things means being willing to act on the name. I was naming it now. "The north room is cold," I said. "You've been in it since January. That's not a kindness I'm proud of." "It's a room," he said. "It's more than I had." "I have more rooms." He looked at me for a long moment. "Clara," he said, and the way he said my name, not ma'am, not the careful address he'd been using for 6 months, landed differently. Like a first time, and also like something that had been true for a while and was only just getting its proper word. I know, I said. I know there's time, and I know there's what people will say, and I know about Naya and I know about Thomas and I know that neither of us is whole, but I don't think, I stopped, started again. I don't think whole is a requirement, I think willing is the requirement, and I am willing if you are. The porch was very quiet. Behind us, somewhere in the ruin, something shifted and settled. The final cooling of a structure giving way to what came next. Eli reached into his coat pocket. He took out one of the small carved pieces, the ones he worked on in the evenings. He set it on the railing between us. I looked at it. It was a small figure, a woman at a writing table, precise and small and unmistakably her, me. The lamp angled, the pen in hand, the ledger open. He'd been making it for a while, weeks at least. The detail was too fine for anything made quickly. I picked it up. It was very light. The wood was smooth to a warmth that meant hands, time, repeated returning. February, I said, remembering what he'd told me. About then, he said. I held it in my palm, and I looked at the horizon where the smoke was thinning out into nothing, just blue sky and the dry heat of a summer that had taken a lot from both of us and given some of it back in ways we hadn't expected. I didn't say anything else. Neither did he. But after a while he moved from the steps to the chair beside mine, the chair where my ledger had been, and we sat there in the morning and watched the smoke finish itself, and I thought about what I would write tonight, and how there wasn't really a column for this, and how that was probably all right. I opened the ledger one more time. Below the March question, below the single line I'd added that night, I wrote one more thing. The date, and then, he carved her at the writing table. He'd been carrying it since February. I left the rest of the page blank. That afternoon I began measuring the linta for extension. Eli held the tape line from the far end, pulling it straight and true. Somewhere between the first measurement and the third, our hands were both on the tape at the same time, and neither of us moved them.